Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you're listening to the New Stack Analyst Podcast, a show about application development and management at scale. Thanks for joining us.
Prisma Cloud is a comprehensive cloud-native security platform with the industry's broadest security and compliance coverage for applications, data, and the entire cloud-native technology stack throughout the development lifecycle and across multi- and hybrid cloud environments.
Well, hello, everybody. It is pancake breakfast time. Thanks to Palo Alto Networks for making this pancake breakfast possible from KubeCon Boston, the North America show. We are all here. We are ready to go. Lynn's got her syrup. I've got my pancakes. Joe has his Mountain Dew from the West Virginia Bureau of the New Stack. And look at that. Everyone has their pancakes. This is terrific. So excited for our breakfast this morning. I want to thank everyone for making this possible. I'm going to have a quick pancake before we get started. Let me see here. Let me just take a little bite. Hey, Lynn, could you pass the syrup, please?
Yes. Enjoy.
Oh, thank you very much for the syrup there. We always say in pancake land, there is a little bit of particle physics going on. How about you, Richard? What do you have there? What's your pancake special there? What do you have? The sour cream and I saw you were talking about it before.
This is kind of a fun little Scandinavian thing. So you take your pancakes, do a little sour cream, and then I have orange marmalade, or you can do any kind of jam you would like on it. But it's a very tasty, almost savory pancake. Still just a tiny bit sweet. It's pretty awesome.
Yum, yum. And Job, what have you got? What do you got, Job, there?
Oh, I'm just sticking with the Mountain Dew. I go straight to the Mountain Dew in the morning. First thing. In the morning.
Good deal.
I don't mess with food.
Good deal. Good deal. So good. So let's get started with our breakfast. I'm going to take a quick bite before we get going, though, just because, it's for good one, for everyone out there. I hope people out in Pancake Land are, that's delicious. So our topic for today is about identity and access management. When IAM hurts, we're easing the pain with pancakes. We have Nathaniel Quist from Palo Alto Networks, Joe from the New Stack, Lynn Sun from the Istio team at IBM. So thank you so much for your participation here. I want to just get started, looking at the context for the world that we're in right now. And we're facing more complexities than we ever have before. Developers have so many choices, especially the ones who are working on back-end infrastructure. And they're trying to think about all these different configurations, all this different interoperability. The amount of code that people are producing is considerable. The dependencies, the vulnerabilities that we see starting to surface are significant as attack surfaces grow and they become more widespread. So, Joe, the amount of code developer writes is so much more than 5 to 10 years ago. I'm wondering about your own coverage from then and how you think about APIs and dependencies. Where does that leave identity and access management? I mean, from your perspective and covering this space for so long.
Well, Linus Torvalds once allegedly said that every problem with Linux is at its heart a permissions problem. And And that's what we're talking about here. Originally, developers never thought about, it's a gross generalization, but developers never thought about the users of, the rights of the users who are using their applications. Identity management is, at heart, it's not exactly a security thing either. It's not a developer problem, or it wasn't a developer problem. It wasn't a security problem. It really almost was a network problem. If a certain individual or a certain process wants to access another process or a resource online, then you have to have the permissions in place to meet all the policy requirements about who can ask and not ask for these particular resources. And this is an entirely new problem with distributed computing on a massive and widespread scale. So it's an entirely new problem, and there are good solutions out there. I'm sure we'll get into OPA pretty shortly, but it's almost a mindset of, number one, who can figure out what to do, and then how to go about and doing it. It's a totally new issue, or relatively new issue, anyway.
Yeah, okay, great. I just want to remind everyone out there who's watching the breakfast that you can ask questions at any time. The platform allows for that, so please ask your questions. We'd love to hear what your thinking is here. We did this when we're in person, where we base a lot of the discussion on the questions that people have. I want to turn, though, next to Nathaniel and get an idea about this complexity and thinking about the actors who are attacking. And what are they targeting? Who are they targeting? Are they taking advantage of things to make their attacks? What's the connection between config management and identity, for instance, in Kubernetes?
Yeah, most certainly. It's a great kind of topic. So within Palo Alto, we do a cloud threat report, and we usually release it every 6 months. So one in the first half of the year and one in the second half of the year. This last one that we released was entirely about identity and kind of some of those aspects that we look at within the cloud infrastructure as far as how identity is misconfigured or how it's scaled across multiple environments. As organizations build into the cloud, they start building environments, and that environment, by using things like infrastructure as code templates or things of that nature, can scale really quickly, dynamically, and that just adds more complexity on top of every single layer. With every new environment that an organization builds, if there is a misconfiguration within an identity resource or something of that nature, it can scale across a lot of different organizations. We have found that there are particular cloud environments. We found that 23% of organizations are experiencing some form of crypto mining operation within their environment. And within those particular groups that are targeting that, so the actual actors that are performing the crypto jacking in those cloud environments, they are specifically targeting those, cloud service provider credentials, if you will, the AWS Access ID and the secret keys that are stored on each one of those particular cloud endpoints. So anything that is scalable, or if those particular IDs, those credentials are actually put into those cloud endpoints, if an attacker was able to compromise that particular system, then they would have access to those credentials that were stored on that endpoint. And then with it just being templatized, just makes it a whole lot easier for them to not just gain access to the system, but then take a step farther and gain access to the actual environment itself. That is a thing that we actually are seeing happening.
Well, Lynn, I'm curious on your perspective so far on what we're just talking about. That with this ever increasing complexity, how is this reflected in service mesh environments, which you work with so closely, and how to manage identity and access management? This has been one of the topics of interest that I've had as we've looked at a service mesh and the role it plays.
Yeah, so before I get to service mesh, I want to take a second from my perspective on how this is not so easy with Kubernetes. So as we all know, developers are moving their applications to Kubernetes. They are looking at microservices as the architecture. So Kubernetes provides service account as identity for services. And you could use like the default service account come with your namespace, or optionally you can use specific service account within the namespace. But these service accounts, they are not really the identity for the user. They're really the identities associated with the service and the parts that's backing up the service to that. Well, you can assign like the cluster role or role or binding to allow you to have access, allow your service to have access to Kubernetes resources and APIs. So these are not service centric. It's really hard for a user, a service owner who develops services and run the services on Kubernetes to say, you know what, I want to control who has access to my service, and I want to configure what are the services I'm allowed to access. And I don't really just want to control that simply at the service level, because I would maybe also want to have even more restrained access, right? I would only want to allow this particular service to access me, maybe only on /hello as a pass. Maybe they can only do get operation. They can't really do post operation. So these are some of the challenges we're trying to solve and provide it a so much easy experience for user on service mesh, while they service mesh would provide authentication and authorization policies that's more service oriented, and they can leverage layer 7 data to make intelligent decisions on that.
Layer 7 data to make intelligent decisions. And how is that in context in comparison to traditional practices people have used? This is a real shift, isn't it?
Definitely a real shift. Yeah. So if you look at Kubernetes without service mesh, I mean, Kubernetes has like service account we talk about, right? Typically people use network policies to kind of config what's allowed to access. And most recently, I believe with network policy, you can specify path selector. So you could potentially say this network policy is from this particular pod with this selector to the particular destination. However, there are some limitations with network policy. First of all, it's not TLS based, so the traffic is not necessarily secured. And network policy typically is more environmental specific. That's more tied to like your IP, your network. So as your services are moved from one Kubernetes to the other Kubernetes, you might have to rewrite a good portion of the network policy. So these challenges are kind of eliminated in the world of service mesh as we elevate from like pod and network centric to the service centric approach with security policies.
Joe, I think there's a little background noise from you. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask a question. Lynn, do you find that it's the application developer that about this, or is it more, does it all fall on the Kubernetes operations crew?
So honestly, for me, application developer have so much to worry about. I mean, because their focus is more business logic, right? Make sure their service is functional. To me, it needs to be like elevated to the platform owner who owns like the architecture and the platform of of Kubernetes to handle that. And the other advantage to handle this elevated way is you get consistency, right? So you got policy consistency among different services. Instead of if you delegate that to your service owner A may handle it different than service owner B. You could get very inconsistent results that may not match your corporate policy.
We do have a question here. Oh, go ahead, Q.
No, I mean, it's perfect. Thank you for giving me the time there. Lynn, I totally agree. And I think we did some research on, Kubernetes YAML files that we were able to scrape from the internet. We looked at about almost 250,000 YAML files to look at configuration specifications. What are users actually doing in their environment? And we found that one of the most common misconfigurations that we found within these particular instances, and I think this has to do with the complexity that you're talking about, is that we found that organizations, or at least the developers of a lot of these YAML files, were actually just running their containers under a root service. And I think that's probably simply because that's just the fastest way to get it done. I mean, with the advent, not even the advent, just the time frame that most developers need to work within in our environment is, do they have time to build a secure operation? Do they have the understanding and the skills, knowledge base of all of those systems to actually put together a secure container cluster? Or is it just, I need to get this done out, I need to get this out the door, we'll worry about security later and we'll just push it out the door? Do you think that the complexity is adding to the insecurity of Kubernetes? Or do you think that we can make like Kubernetes clusters, building a cluster with a proper mesh, like easily accessible by the masses?
Yeah, I really think that's the goal of the industry as overall, right? We want to build the right skeleton, I would say, for the infrastructure, for application developers that has the right security policies in place. And then the platform owner or the operator, if you wish to call, who can control that security policy based on their corporate requirement and their customer requirements. And then each service owner, I would think it's just filling in, their services in there. And then their services will be fitting into the big picture of compliance and security. And honestly, my goal is the ask for service owners should be really minimum. And I would maybe expect them to propagate security headers, right? Like JWT headers, they got to propagate that so we can continue leverage that throughout the request. But I think the industry is trending towards zero trust security, where each of the requests are secured, not only on secure naming, but also on encryption, mutual TLS, and also the authorization on top of all that.
It's privilege as well.
Yeah, well, we have a question, and I'd love to get to it. And just for everyone who's out there, thank you for joining us. And we would love to hear your questions. We do this in person when we did have that opportunity before at Pancake Breakfast. So please feel free to ask anything you like. I want to get to the first question from Jeffrey Bradley, who says, in the old days, we would host our secure portions behind a DMZ, and then have a small portion open to the public. I know Kate seems to allow a similar ability with defining the ingress control. With Kubernetes, have we quit isolating operations? Nathaniel?
It's a good look because the crusty exterior, that DMZ hard shell, and then the soft gooey interior of the of a traditional network is kind of gone away, especially with Kubernetes being app focused, and making that interface between, end users and the actual services they use, making that boundary, that edge barrier, so much more, it's thinner, to say it easily, and isolating your applications, isolating our containers to just that one application being exposed to those particular end users with, the databases laying behind it, they should be, protected or isolated from inside of that, I guess you could call it a mini DMZ within a cluster. I think that it's really important to do that within the containers that we've seen, or at least that we've researched. That there are certainly attempts to make that happen. But we still find a lot of organizations that are still just, exposing or running services with root access, which is just, don't do that. But that's common still. And I think that there's complexity. I would like to hear Lynn's idea on this with, are we isolating processes, or are we isolating containers, or is it just, I'd like to hear, what you think.
Yeah, so I think we are going to continue on the trend to secure the edge. In fact, if you look at service mesh, typically right now, not only we secure the edge, the inlet, the traffic coming in edge, we also secure the outgoing edge, right? So that's what Kubernetes doesn't really do right now. So not only you control precisely what are the traffic coming, but also you don't really trust anything that's already in your network, even though, the services might be within the VPC or private network, you just don't trust. It's like you still want to validate the identity, like we were mentioning. You want to validate the key and search, make sure, they can be really mutual trusted. And then as your services needs to go out to the cluster, maybe consume some services on IBM Cloud or maybe Google Cloud, you want to kind of secure the outbound traffic as well. And it's highly recommended for you so that your platform owner can set up a policy onto, hey, these are the services we trust as external services, and these are the only services you can work with as service owner within the particular Kubernetes environment.
I'm so glad that you mentioned and you talked about, restricting outbound access to services, because we see, 80 to 90% of organizations don't even touch their outbound egress. They only address their inbound, network traffic for restrictions. So thank you for mentioning that. It's important to know what your services should be talking to and limiting them to only those specific lanes. I think that's very important for containers. It is an application, and that's the only thing it should be doing. It should be doing nothing else other than that one service that it's providing. That should be the same for network traffic as well. So yeah, thank you.
I have some questions. Go ahead, Lynn. Go ahead.
I was just going to emphasize the importance of the outbound. In fact, a good practice is you kind of run like your outbound egress gateway on dedicated nodes, and then you can make sure all the traffic from your mesh, or if it needs to go outbound, only goes through the egress gateway first, and then reach out to the outbound, so that you have kind of double security on that too.
Well, then I do want to add here again that there's actually an opportunity to win a spatula. You could get a spatula if you ask a question. So here's the spatulas. You got to flip those pancakes somehow. Flip them. So we have another question from Deepak Vish, and Deepak asks, he actually has two questions. And so why don't we go for the first one on about identity standpoints. He says, from identity standpoint, service mesh works at the service level. How does it tie back to the user identity level, for instance, in these identity management environments? And this is a question I have too about the varying types of identity management systems out there for Kubernetes. There really is no standard. And what happens if you're, pulling in identity, pulling in information from external sources that might be from a virtualized environment, for instance, that might not actually be part of the Kubernetes, may not be a Kubernetes artifact at all.
Do you want me to take that, Alex?
Sure, Lynn, why don't you go for it?
Okay, so from a service mesh perspective, specifically for Istio, we have authentication policies, right? So inside of authentication policies, there are two types. One is request authentication, which is also called end user authentication. The second type is peer authentication, which is typically referring to mutual TLS used for service-to-service authentication, like you were saying. So let me focus on the request authentication. So request authentication is used for end-user authentication to verify the credential attached to the request. So, for instance, Istio users can interact with Istio by enabling like request level authentication with JOT token, and then Istio can help validate when the request come in. If the request has like a bell token, ingress gateway of Istio can validate their bell token along with the JOT credential to see, does the user have the right credential. So that's how you kind of be able to kind of tie the external identity management level into a service mesh at the edge tier when the traffic comes in, and then optionally, if you choose, you could potentially propagate that request that has the identity information throughout your microservices, so that Istio can double check as part of the RBAC rules. It can check, only if it's this principle, the traffic can be allowed.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Nathaniel?
No, I think covered it very well, for sure. Identity is such an important aspect of endpoint security, especially in cloud environments, and just having Istio being able to double check or, each one of those connection services, people who are connecting to it, it's very helpful. So,
great. So, Job, I wanted to ask you about the general tone from the conference on topics related to security. I know Spiffy Spire has been getting some attention. What topics security, in kind of from a security perspective overall, are we seeing emerge at the conference this week? You're on mute.
Oh, well, we're seeing a lot of new projects come along that are addressing this particular problem. In addition, like OPA, I remember when OPA was introduced 3 years ago out at KubeCon, the interest was fantastic. I mean, I think we had a Pancake Podcast on that topic, on that technology, and the crowd overfilled into the hallways. It was so good. Now we have some other things happening. Iberno, a open source Kubernetes native policy engine, this comes from Namada, has also joined the CNCF. And this will help bridge Kubernetes policies to the developers and to the platform developers by providing a set of native tools. There's also the Cert Manager project that comes, I think, from Jetstream, and that was a certificate management controller, and certs are always a headache to get up and running, but this allows you to issue certificates from Let's Encrypt, HashiCorp Vault, and others. So there's a security is a growing issue. I'm looking forward to Ian Coldwater's talk today during the keynote. and she's going to delve into that more. And just as an aside, since you asked me about security, Dave Aronchek had a fantastic talk the other day about security in machine learning, and this is a totally new field. I'm looking forward to diving more into this. But basically, you can, or an attacker, you say, can get, I guess, a rough description of how a particular model works just by querying it, a few hundred times, and just seeing the responses. And this is both for image recognition. He had a great example of image recognition, and also for the speech recognition as well. And the idea is, instead of spending millions of dollars to build out models, you can just take a model that's exposed through the public internet or that you have access to, query it, and come up with a rough approximation pretty quickly. So, there's definitely a lot of talk about security as Kubernetes moves away from the prototypes and the skunk works and moves into actual production, and security becomes a chief issue.
Good stuff, Job. Good stuff. Now, Nathaniel, there is a question here from Ethan Kleiner, and Ethan asks, a question for Nathaniel, given the space of work he's in now. What's the most common no-no that's been seen for maintaining security in Kubernetes? Privileged containers, something else you'd like to know so you can be sure to avoid it? Thank you, Ethan Kleiner.
Yeah, most certainly. I think the biggest issues right now would surrounding Kubernetes, just as we see as across the industry, is, again, I've mentioned it a couple times already, but not running your containers with root access, just really limiting the services that are allowed to serve, the service connections allowed to particular applications, to particular containers, making sure that those are not root. That would be helpful. And then, using, if there's a way to validate those users that are actually pushing code, those services that are pushing code, whether using Jenkins or some sort of CI/CD pipeline to, push those systems up there. Essentially, we're trying to control the identity, who has access to those systems. Least privileges, reducing the amount of rights that particular container has to only specifically what it's supposed to be using. And there was a third one. Oh, and vulnerabilities, making sure that the applications themselves are in the latest patch, their latest release. So continually scanning your container environment for vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, using some sort of infrastructure as code, scanner. There are a couple that are out there for sure. There's several open source ones. Palo Alto has one within its Prisma Cloud tool set. So scan your systems, make sure that the vulnerabilities are taken care of, make sure there's not any misconfigurations, make sure that they're not running under privileged accounts, and limit what actions and rights they are allowed to do. They shouldn't be doing anything other than what that one specific job they're supposed to be doing.
Excellent. You still have a chance to win a spatula. Yeah, spatula. I'll stop talking about spatulas. So, Lynn, I have a question for you. And one question came in, I think, really quickly. How does Istio differ from Linkerd? And that came from Niyanta Das. There was another question, too. And how do the API management tools like Apogee work with the Istio service mesh? How does the identity work for the proxy endpoints in east-west connections?
Wow, 3 questions for me. Okay, great. So I could be biased when I'm being asked how Istio differs from Linkerd. So I will try to be very neutral. The biggest difference, I would say, in 2 folds, if you ask me. First is the proxy use, right? We both are service mesh, right? So Istio use Envoy. If you read the CNCF reports, I think come out 3 days ago on the survey, Envoy is continue to have a lot of momentum as a real popular proxy. So LinkedIn using their own proxy written in Rust. So that would be the number one difference. Number two difference I would say is the community behind Istio. Istio is a 5-year project. When Istio was incubated at IBM and Google before Istio even exists. So that's like 1 year work plus. Istio is about 4 years old now. So there's 300 company and 400 plus contributor are backing Istio projects. So when you evaluate an open source project, I think a key criteria I personally look at is, how diverse the contributors are, what are the key companies backing of the projects, because I think these are super important perspective. So please maybe Google a little bit more on this topic. There's plenty of information,
Sure.
But these are the two I would highlight.
Okay. And as far as, API management, and how it works with Istio, for instance.
Yeah, so I would say API management tool complement to a service mesh like Istio. I remember in very early days of Istio, we actually had an API management work group, and we were trying to kind of fold some of the API management functionality into Istio. But then we realized it's more important for service mesh to be simple and focus on the key scenarios we want to solve, which is connect, secure, and observe. So we fundamentally decided API management is out of the scope for service mesh like Istio, and we kind of disassemble that work group as the result of that. However, API management continue have a play in this space, right? Because people still wants to get like their pricing and data usage of the API. That's when you can potentially use API management in conjunction with service mesh.
Can I tag on to that one just real fast? And I want to ask Lynn a question specifically on API as far within Istio. As a researcher, I like to poke around at things and see what other information I can possibly get out of a particular tool. And I looked at Istio for a while, and unfortunately, time constraints, I had to go to a different aspect. One of the things I was looking at was the API connectivity for Istio. And I'm curious, is there like an API monitor, a querying monitor system that will, limit things, attempts of fuzzing? Is there a security product within Istio or a security feature that like limits the amount of APIs or, the fuzzing capability of somebody doing something malicious to an Istio mesh?
Yeah, so you could potentially, so Istio by itself is extensible, right? So we actually re-architect our extensibility. So it used to be a component called Mixer, where you can, as a user or a provider, you can write plugin for Mixer. For example, OPA has a Mixer adapter. So that's how they extend Istio to work with OPA. So when the request comes into microservices, it can check with OPA to see, hey, is this request allowed? Now we are onto the trend. Instead, Istio 1.8 just went out yesterday, and we actually removed the Mixer component. The reason is Envoy, the WASA module of Envoy has been the new industry trend to allow users to do customizations for that sidecar proxy. So you could potentially write Envoy either using Envoy filter or either using WASM module to write like rate limiting. We do have a test case to have, like, for instance, for rate limiting Envoy filter that allows to control the rate for a particular service.
Thank you. That's awesome news. Awesome information.
Yeah,
Joe,
anytime. So should Alex, should I get to the other question?
Yeah, let's address that.
Yeah, so the question is, how does the identity works for the proxy endpoints in East and West connections? Right. So Istio uses like secure naming for each of the services. So as the service, as the pod for the services gets boot up in the service mesh, so the sidecar proxy would base on the secrets for the service account for that particular service, along with like the root certificate to get to issue a certificate signing request with Istio control plane. So as part of the signing request, it would get like keys and certs related for that service. So when the traffic are established between service A to service B for two services within the mesh, basically the sidecar proxy would trap all the incoming traffic as the traffic goes out from pod A to pod B. So the sidecar proxy would check would send the keys and certs to pod B. On the B side, the sidecar proxy is going to trap the incoming traffic, and it's going to check does A have the right identity? Does A have the right certificate? And that is A even allowed to talk to B? Is there any RBAC rules in place? If all the things are checked to be successful, then the sidecar proxy on the service B side would forward the traffic to the B container that service B owner wrote. So that's how the traffic kind of works for identity. So basically, we use mutual TLS, the key answers, and also secure naming to make sure the traffic can be allowed.
All right. Well, a little more housekeeping. So we're really appreciating all the questions coming in. So keep bringing them. Keep bringing the questions. So how do you get a spatula? Well, you can direct message us on Twitter at the new Stack, or you can email Colleen at thenewstack.io, or you can even go to our booth at KubeCon to get the link to the forum for the spatula award, so to speak. Job, any questions that you'd like to ask that you're seeing from the audience?
Yeah, the questions are some of the questions are pretty specific, but I think Ian had addressed them pretty well. Something I'm very curious about, we haven't really talked about OPA yet, the open policy authorization open policy agent. As I guess I would like to ask the presenters, I mean, are they seeing this as the default a way of handling policies with Kubernetes, or are there concerns about OPA, or what's happening out there?
I guess I'll take off this little section first. I mean, from my aspect, I have not seen anything, like I haven't seen OPA being directly targeted by anything. So I can't really comment onto its further functionality outside of that.
Yeah, I would say OPA is certainly very popular. I know in early days of Istio, there are people from the community challenging Istio, why are you using SPIFFE for identity? Why are we not using OPA? So the result of that discussion landed on the mixer adapter for OPA, right? So we kind of want to prove to the community, hey, not only we support the default one, but also you can extend if OPA is your preferred choice for authorization. So you could potentially extend a service mesh like Istio to support OPA.
Getting a little noise there in the background. So I want to ask a question from Joshua Bell, and I'm going to direct this one to you, Nathaniel. What are some great tools for discovering issues with my IAM setup?
Yeah, perfect. So looking for your identity and access management, I'm looking for tools that can scan those, or at least look at your configuration. If you're looking for like a native cloud security platform or CNSP, there are a number of them available. There are specific tools. There's a lot of open source tools, specifically at GitHub. There's IAM scanners. There are config management templates, specifically within Prisma Cloud, which is my overarching Palo Alto family that I'm in. Prisma Cloud, as soon as you bring your cloud platform into the system, it is immediately scanning your IAM configurations to look for misconfigurations and things of that nature. There are other tools, since I am part of Prisma Cloud and Palo Alto, that's just my first go-to because they pay my bills. But there are a number of open source tools that are out there to assist with scanning. And we can throw together a list at some point. I don't have anything just right off the top of my head.
Okay, great. So why don't we just then ask a last question from someone who hasn't actually had the chance to ask a question yet. Let's see here. We have one from Ricardo. Actually, we have one from Ricardo, and he's asking again about API gateways, and he's asking, what I miss is to be able to see the API contracts of the microservices running in the mesh. He says, I believe that it doesn't make sense to have it as we don't have an API gateway as mentioned, correct? Does that make sense? He's missing the API contracts of the microservices running in the mesh. He says it doesn't make sense for him to have it as they don't, as they, meaning his company, doesn't have an API gateway as mentioned. We'll go on to another.
Understand.
Okay.
I guess I would just need to have a little bit more information.
Okay, let's go on to then one last question because we're going to have to run. We're right at the end of the time. So what's the work that you're really excited about? What are you seeing for you as you move forward in this space? What is it that's really getting you excited, Lynn?
Yeah, so I would say, I would emphasize security is hard. In Istio, we spend a lot of time. We moved from microservices to monolithic. We stopped mounting service-specific keys and certs to the pod. We did a lot of change in our own control plane to make sure it's as secure as it could be. So I'm very excited, in this space, as we continue to collaborate on the service mesh, we can hopefully provide users security policies for the platform owners that would save the service owner from worry too much about security, identity, access control. I'm really hoping, we can, through our technologies like service mesh, we can elevate that to a much higher level to the platform owner.
Nathaniel.
I mean, the cloud is 64% of our internet right now. It's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's getting more prevalent. So there are so many opportunities. There are so many things from a researcher to look at and investigate and try to figure out if it's actually working securely and properly. So it's just it's an amazing field to be in.
Way to go. Nice job, everyone. Thank you for participating in our Pancake Breakfast. I want to thank Palo Alto Networks, another special round of applause. And I also want to just say, after the pancakes here, you can go to the New Stack booth and enter our spatula contest sweepstakes to win a Star Wars spatula set. So may the force be with you. May the pancakes be with you. May we live on and prosper in this new age. Thank you so much for joining us, Lynn. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Joe, we appreciate your participation. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Prisma Cloud is a comprehensive cloud-native security platform with the industry's broadest security and compliance coverage for applications, data, and the entire cloud-native technology stack throughout the development lifecycle and across multi- and hybrid cloud environments.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Analysts at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.